It's the Resistance Report, February 7th, 2017. Good evening. Today, Betsy DeVos was confirmed as Secretary of Education of the United States. Now, here's a woman who has absolutely no qualifications to be Secretary of Education. In fact, she has no qualifications, as far as I can tell, to be anything. A 4-year-old probably knows more about education, or at least a first grader. Let's put it up to 6-year-old. Knows more about education than Betsy DeVos. She's never been in public schools. She doesn't understand public schools. Her kids have never been to public schools. She never actually has even entered, as far as I know, a public school. But what is her qualification? Her qualification is that she and her family have given millions of dollars to Republicans over the last several years. In fact, during her questioning on her confirmation, Bernie Sanders asked her if her family had donated $200 million to support the Republican Party over the last several years, and she said that's possible. Well, as far as we can tell from campaign funding reports, that is in the ballpark. So in other words, if you campaign and provide enough money for a campaign, you don't even have to campaign, just shell out enough money. If you have enough money, if you are an Amway heiress or any other person with a great deal of money, you can buy a cabinet position, even if you know nothing about the issue at hand. Donald Trump, remember Donald Trump was going to drain the swamp? Well, he is not draining the swamp. The swamp is getting swampier. There are more alligators. There are more snakes. I want to just read to you very, very, very briefly the list of Republican senators who voted for her, who will be up for re-election in 2018. It's not a long list. You may just want to jot them down. If you know anybody who lives in these states, or if you are in these states, remember, these are Republican senators who voted to confirm somebody who has no credentials whatsoever, knows nothing about education, except she's donated a lot of money to the Republican Party. So we've got Jeff Flake in Arizona, Roger Wicker in Mississippi, Deborah Fisher in Nebraska, Dean Heller in Nevada, Bob Corker in Tennessee, Ted Cruz in Texas, Warren Hatch in Utah, and John Barroso in Wyoming. Now, if you know them, if you know anybody in any of those states, make sure that they are held accountable for their entire and total lack of principle, lack of scruple, putting party way ahead of public interest. Now, one thing that Betsy DeVos wants to do is take public taxpayer money and give it to private schools, including religious schools. Now, this is important because this is our handy-dandy Constitution of the United States. Hope by now you have one. This is a very small, the Constitution is not a very, very big document, but it is a very important document. Amendment 1, First Amendment of the Constitution, says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Well, isn't that important? I mean, if you take taxpayer money and you give it to religious schools, isn't there a conflict with the First Amendment? By the way, if you declare that you're going to ban Muslims from coming into your country, and by the way, that is a Muslim ban. If there was any doubt about it, Rudy Giuliani, a Trump aide and helper over the last few months, put to rest any question, because Rudy Giuliani, as you know, said that Trump asked him specifically, how can I have a Muslim ban and make it look like it is not a Muslim ban? Well, a Muslim ban is also a violation of the same clause I just read to you. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You say, these people who have a certain religion are going to be second-class citizens. They're not citizens at all. They're just not even going to be able to get in. Even if they are Muslims, but they've gone to another country, gone to one of these 7 countries, by the way, where Donald Trump has no business interests, predominantly Muslim, they can't get back in. The case is being argued today before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals But what's being argued, you've got to understand, is not the underlying question of the constitutionality of the ban. What's being argued is the stay, the temporary injunction that stops the ban temporarily until there's an opportunity to fully litigate the constitutionality of this ban. Even so, Donald Trump continues to criticize the judges, continues to criticize the judiciary, continues to lie. Now you remember, right after Donald Trump talked about the very dishonest press who don't want to report on terrorism, conjured up a conspiracy in the media against him and against Americans because the press doesn't want to report on terrorism. Remember, right after that, well, hours later, Sean Spicer, the communications director, the press secretary for Donald Trump, offered a list of 78 examples of terrorism that he said went unreported or underreported. 78 examples from September 2014 to 2016. Just to back up his boss's claim that the press was not reporting or underreporting or covering up terrorism. Now, the problem is, if you look at those 78 cases, some of the attacks were very well reported. They were headline attacks. The Pulse Nightmare attack, the Bastille Day attack in Nice, France, the explosions in Paris. Those were well reported, so those don't really count, but they were on that 78 list. More than half of the incidences involved the deaths of 2 or fewer people around the world. Now, not to make light of that, they're serious, but when you have 2 or fewer people around the world someplace that might have been involved in a terrorist event, maybe it's not headline news in the United States. That doesn't mean the press is covering it up. And interestingly, the countries most devastated by terrorism, that is, Iraq, Nigeria, Syria, they didn't even make it on the list at all. There were no incidents on that list from the White House of terrorist attacks that did not get covered that occurred in those 3 countries, Iraq, Nigeria, or Syria. Perhaps most seriously, none of the attacks on the list involved attacks in the United States by non-Muslims. We have had terrorism in the United States by non-Muslims, including the killings of African-American churchgoers in Charleston, South Carolina, at the hands of white supremacist Dylan Roof. That was not on the list. What does that mean? Why single out one form of terrorism and not even mention another form of terrorism? A 2015 report from the New America Foundation found that of the 28 deadly terror attacks in the United States over the previous 4 years, of the 28 of them, 18 were incidents inspired by right-wing extremism, while 10 were inspired by Islamic extremism. So why is it that Donald Trump is so fixated on Muslim extremism and doesn't even want to talk about or remind us that we have a problem here with right-wing extremism? There is absolutely no substitute, my friends, for spreading the truth every way you can. On social media, among your friends and associates, through letters to the editor. Don't stop. That is part of the resistance. Part of the resistance is understanding that the Trump regime, the Trump-Bannon regime, is waging a war on the truth. And we must fight back in order to save our democracy. Now, one final point. Republicans and Democrats obviously don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues. There is and has been in this country for many years a great left versus right divide. It's a philosophical divide to some extent on how much government you want. It is a legitimate divide on certain issues. People don't see eye to eye on every issue. My father was a Republican for most of his life, until his son joined the Bill Clinton cabinet. But let me say this, and say it as strongly as I can. The issue we are confronting now is not a right versus left, Democrat versus Republican, conservative versus liberal issue. The challenge we are confronting now is a challenge of pending tyranny. The fascist tendencies of Donald Trump, the authoritarianism that Donald Trump is invoking, the lack of respect for democratic institutions is something that Republicans should be concerned equally about as Democrats. In fact, if anything, if there has been and is a Republican philosophy, it is a fear of central power, of too much central power, and a protection of liberty. And so we must join. Republicans, you have got to join with Democrats. Democrats, we must join with Republicans to fight this. If this is just seen as a partisan fight, another partisan fight, we end up normalizing what is actually happening. We end up normalizing Donald Trump's attacks, personal attacks, on federal judges. We end up normalizing Donald Trump's lies, big lies, over and over again about his mandate, for example. We end up normalizing what Donald Trump is doing to the press and his attempts to manipulate in ways that we have never seen in this country. We end up normalizing Donald Trump's attacks on everybody who is a critic of Donald Trump. We end up normalizing a road to authoritarianism, which no Republican should want. The only way we can guarantee that it doesn't happen is if Republicans join with Democrats to make sure it doesn't happen. This document is not just for Democrats. This isn't for liberals. This is not for people who consider themselves on just one side of the divide. This document is for all of us. And so the resistance to Donald Trump must not be seen as a party or one-sided or liberal. The resistance to Donald Trump, based on this document, is a resistance to authoritarian tyranny. I want to thank you all again for doing what you are doing. Many of you are incredibly active, incredibly strong. You have pushed. In fact, you pushed when it came to Betsy DeVos and the two Republicans who voted against her, Susan Collins from Maine and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. Both of them said that they were pushed by thousands of people who contacted them to vote against Betsy DeVos, notwithstanding that they were Republicans. So I want to send my kudos to those two Republican senators for standing up for principle and having the integrity to do so. They were under a great deal of pressure, but I want to congratulate all of you who were active in pushing them. It's not the end of the line, by the way, with education. I want to stress to you that also. Because with that kind of a lack of mandate Betsy DeVos has, those authorizing committees, those appropriation committees, every time she appears before Congress, and I can tell you, as a former cabinet secretary, you're up there all the time. It's going to be very hard for her. They're going to keep her on a very, very short leash. They're going to watch everything she does. You can't be a cabinet secretary and win by only one vote, a vice president intervening, and expect to have free reign. She won't. That's the resistance report tonight. I'll see you tomorrow.